And good evening. This is Thomas Gibson in disguise, and this is Nye County, the show for and about the people of the county of Nye. And to my left is my co-host, Chuck Augustin, and he's going to be assisting me and actually leading the show tonight on the New World Order and how it affects you here in Nye County.
Hi, thanks, Tom. The thing about the New World Order is it's still often labeled into this category called conspiracy theory. And also it's evolved in whatever name it wants to use. Agenda 21, the United Nations, Bilderbergers, the Round Table of Europe, the Committee of 300. It's got a million names and a million tentacles that go through secret societies around the world. And when it began, who knows? Unless you're a part of it, you really don't know the details. You don't know exactly who's involved. But I certainly know there are some bloodlines or family names, as we call them, that have been involved for a long, long time and have in fact molded our country and its institutions, and particularly the Federal Reserve System, which is not federal and they don't have any reserves.
Right. And the New World Order, in my understanding, is that most of its roots it can be theoretically traced back even down into Babylon, Egypt, and some of the earlier civilizations. And those wealthy kings and princes and queens and dictators didn't just disappear when those countries or nations were either overtaken by others or disappeared into oblivion like the Celts did. Those very wealthy people went on and married other wealthy people, and they maintained that bloodline. If you read the book or saw the movie,
The Da Vinci Code?
The Da Vinci Code, I'm sorry, duh. The Da Vinci Code, it gets into the Rosicrucians, and the Rosicrucians were a very powerful group out of southern France, and they believe that their bloodline goes back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and if you ask these people, they're convinced that they are direct descendants. So even if it's not true, the people are absolutely convinced that they are from these bloodlines, and so not only do they have the wealth, but they have the mental position that they are better than we are down here on the lower end of the spectrum.
And in fact, they've received their power from divinity.
Right.
In other words, they think either the gods or God gave them the power, or in fact they are gods.
Right, and that's how the ancient civilizations were able to pull it off, and the people were afraid to rebel or whatnot because they'd get killed, but also because they didn't want to offend the gods, because the gods or God is the one that put them in that position.
Exactly.
And so, anyway, as we moved away from polytheism to monotheism, then it's just one God putting them there. Like, of course, the royal family in England, the Windsors were put there by God, of course, and God is protecting them and keeping them there in power, and that's why no one has to bother voting for them, because God makes that one vote himself.
Speaking of that, we got one of my favorite gods, Ray Nozinski, the flag man. Hi, Ray.
Gentlemen, it's good to see you on TV tonight. I want to thank Bodius for being there today at the commission meeting, because we saved the Tigers, and it's a very rewarding to see good people like you come in and help out. So I just want to thank you on that. I almost didn't recognize Gibson at the beginning when he took the mask off. I said, there he is. There he is. And I want to congratulate Noah, because he brought you guys up forward again. You started out way in back, and he focused and brought you in. He could probably bring you in a little closer, but this is good. It's very adequate.
Well, someone might want to tell Noah that we can't really hear you. The speaker is only coming from the tech room, and we can't hear you very well, but I picked up most of what you said.
Right.
I said, thank you very much. You guys were wonderful at the commission meeting today. You helped save the Tigers. And then I want to ask you a question, if you can hear me now. Can you? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We're still working on the technical issue, Ray. We can barely hear you. But anyway, congratulations on the verdict today that we did, in fact, save the Tigers.
Yeah, we did.
And I want to
votes.
congratulate. If you hadn't done it, Ray, I couldn't hear very well. But if you haven't congratulated the commission, I do, and I applaud their decision. And it was really a simple decision because, as my good friend Marla Zlotek with the District Attorney's Office pointed out, is that the only purpose for today's hearing was just to determine whether or not the lower body, which was the Planning Commission, whether they did their job right. And no new things were supposed to be brought up, although that crackpot from the PETA group, she tried to run her mouth a little bit. And then we had other people that were for the Tigers, and they kind of had to have their say, and they really didn't need to, because it's very apparent that the commission was happy with the decision procedurally what happened at the lower in the lower body.
Well, we've got the conditional use permit. We're happy, and we just hope we don't get any more static. And like I had mentioned to you, Tom, we need a definition of the word exhibiting, because they're using any little nuance. I mean, you can't take a picture and you're exhibiting. I mean, this is ridiculous. So we got to get on that. But I heard on the Dave Champion show the other day. Can you hear me now? You can hear me all right?
No, we still can't hear you, Ray. Noah's working feverishly behind the scenes trying to get it.
Yeah, we can pick up a little of what you're saying. It's kind of like, well, literally, you are across the room on a telephone.
All right, I'll speak a little louder.
No,
Maybe
that works.
help out.
Good. Just keep shouting.
All right. I want to know, Dave Champion on his show the other day said that our presidents are being picked by some group, that each president is being picked. Is that correct, by some group? Is it Bilderbergers or whatever? Can you explain that? And I'll get off of the line and maybe
since the
try
beginning
again
of this
later.
country.
Okay? You got that one?
One of the things I brought with me tonight is it's a list of 10 presidents and politicians who told us that a secret government controls the world, and what they said. And this list includes Canadian defense ministers, a lot of presidents, and a lot of mayors and senators. But one of the quotes I'd like to read in particular was one of the early ones made by JFK, a Democrat, who followed President Eisenhower, a Republican. Now, this was in 1961. President Eisenhower, during his farewell address in January of '61, warned of the military-industrial group and the threat that it imposed on our freedoms. Now, this is from a general of the Allied forces during World War II who went on to become a president for 8 years, and at the end of his term, he warned us of his own group and their influence, negative influence, on our freedoms. Then 3 months later, JFK, during a speech he made, which is called the Secret Society speech, and let me read this real quick. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Now, he wasn't talking about the Soviet Union, and he sure wasn't talking about any country that existed during that period or since. So certainly, my own feeling is ever since the coup d'etat, if you want to call it that, of the Federal Reserve, and even before that, and this is going back again to 1913 and before, the early 1900s, late 1800s, there was a basic coup d'etat by the banking establishment of Europe and America. It included names like Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and others, as well as emissaries of the Rothschilds, who basically controlled Europe. And they took over our country, and they did it by taking over the issuance of currency.
You there, Ray? Oh. Also, is something that's little known to people, the owners of the Federal Reserve, and it certainly isn't the American people. The owners of the Federal Reserve, as far as is commonly known, the Rothschilds Bank of London and Berlin, the Lazard Brothers of Bank of Paris, Israel Moses Schief Bank of Italy, Warburg Bacchus of Hamburg and Amsterdam, Lehman Brothers Bank of New York, Kuhn Loeb Bank of New York, Chase Manhattan Bank of New York, controlled by the Rockefellers, and Goldman Sachs Bank of New York. And by the way, I was kind of I'm a Trump supporter, but I liked Cruz until I found out that his wife worked at Goldman Sachs and that they were getting loans from Goldman Sachs, which tells me that they certainly are in thick with some of the more undesirable New World Order folks. So I've withdrawn my support of him, and I'm sure he's going to be really upset about that.
But he's got Sarah Palin's support now. She came forth today.
Trump.
Yeah, and endorsed Trump.
Yes, and we'll get on that bit later because I had a little tete-a-tete with David Champion over that. We got a break here for a commercial, and we'll be back as soon as we get back.